Alrighty, y'all. So today we're going to be talking about the many different types of muskrat traps you can use. So first category we're going to start out with is the foothold traps. These are probably the most commonly used in probably by muskrat trappers and other trappers. Probably the most commonly used trap in general. So we're going to start out with number one long spring. Number one jaw spread is typically used for muskrat, although there are some traps that are used for raccoon with that size jaw spread. This has one spring, pretty much muskrat trap primarily, and as you can see, long spring because it's got a long spring on it. And then the number 11 trap is basically the same thing with an extra spring for more holding power for raccoon, although you could still use these for muskrat. Now, the thing I want to mention is different styles of footholds. So these are long springs, and then these traps here are coil springs, because they're powered by coiled springs. Now, before I start talking into these types of traps here, I'm going to mention the advantages and disadvantages of each quick. As far as I know them, I haven't been trapping for 40 years or anything, but I've done a few tests, and as far as sticking stuff in them, seeing how much pressure it takes to pull something out of it, reading on them and setting them myself to see how much pressure they take to set. I've found long springs, in my opinion, to be a little bit easier to set once you know how to set them. When I got this trap brand new, I was trying to stand on these with my feet, and it was hard to set, but the way you got to do it is essentially put your knee here and pull these down at an angle over your knees, and that's really easy to set them that way. And I still set coil springs by setting them down on the ground and stepping on these, which is pretty much the easiest way to set them. Which is why I prefer long springs for water trapping, because if you're in the water, you can just put these on your knee and set them. Well, these ones you can put on your knee and set them. They take much more force, and it's not very comfortable, versus these ones are pretty easy to set. The other advantage of the long springs, as far as I've tested it, I've tested number 11 double long spring versus a number one coil spring, and this one held much better. So it seems that long springs, at least as far as I've tested, hold better. I've also heard that these springs last a lot longer, and I have many traps from the 60s. I think I might even have one from the 40s, where the springs are just as good as the new ones, if not better. But as coil springs, they say these can wear out and you'll eventually have to replace them. However, these traps are more compact. They're really easy to find, as most footholds are coil springs now. In fact, there are many sizes of long springs that are only made through one manufacturer, Sleepy Creek. And you'd really have to buy them online unless you have a dealer near you, because I haven't been able to find them anywhere near me. However, there are some sizes that are relatively easy to get. Pretty easy to get number 11s or number 1 long springs, because those are common sizes, as well as the number 5 long springs, but anything in the middle you can't really find. So back to the traps here. Coil springs, 1.5 coil is used by some people. Some people also use a 1 3/4, simply because it has more weight to drown. 1.5, the advantage of this is you have a bigger jaw spread, bigger pan, bigger catch area, a little bit more weight to drown the thing. However, with these, some people will heat up the springs to weaken them. Otherwise, you might snap the leg and lose the animal. Which brings me into another thing. When you're using traps like this, you typically want to set it up to drown, so you don't have to worry about it wringing its leg off or anything like that. You can just drown it. And then we're going to talk about the trap that solves the problem of ring off next after this one. This is a number 1 coil spring, essentially the same thing as this, but just a little bit smaller. Number 1 jaw spread, and it's a coil spring. Coil springs are more compact. That's why a lot of people use them. And then to solve the ring off problem, you have these stop loss traps. As I mentioned, these you pretty much, if you're using these for muskrat, you want to set them up to drown the animal. These ones, however, are made to be used where drowning is not an option. So the trap will go off on the animal's leg like this, and then when it starts pulling, it'll deploy the guard and pin the animal, and that way it can't wring its leg off. So these traps are used and liked by many people for that reason, and they're good to have in your arsenal. Some people like them, some people don't see the purpose of them, but I think the concept is certainly a pretty good idea. And then as more footholds, we have here is this is a 1.5 jump trap. They don't make jump traps anymore. I've heard some people say they were replaced by the better coil springs. I've heard some people argue that these are better, but they were pretty expensive, which is what I heard. Why people stopped making them is because they just got pretty expensive with the spring steel base and this part being spring steel. And I believe they stopped making these in 1984. So a 1.5 jump, number 1 jump. They even made number 1 jump stop loss traps, which are pretty rare. But all of those would work for muskrat. This is a number 1 stop loss long spring. And other long springs you could use for muskrat would include a 1.5, which is essentially this jaw spread with one spring, or a number 2, which would be this jaw spread with 2 springs. So those are essentially all the footholds that I could think of, all off the top of my head at least, that you could use for muskrat. There may be a few more smaller or bigger ones, but once you get the one, you don't want to go too small and you don't really want to go too big either. The next type we have are the Conibears, whereas the footholds snap onto the animal's leg. These ones snap onto the neck and kill the animal, either by like breaking its neck or either killing it instantly or suffocating it. So these traps are nice because they kind of have a different role. Like you can kind of put these at the end of like a hole to snap onto the neck. The use is just a little bit different than footholds. And these are pretty cheap too. I paid $3.50 for these, and the cheapest foothold I can buy brand new is $5, and these are $3.50 brand new. And of course, they also make 150s, which are a 5x5 and have 1 spring. These are a 4.5 inch by 4.5 inch. That's the Duke 110. Some 110s are maybe 3.5 by 4 or 4 by 4. But, you know, the ones that are a little bit smaller you could still use for muskrat. The 5x5s you could still use for muskrat. And that is Conibears and footholds. Now, another category is colony traps. I don't have one, but what they are is essentially a cage that would sit just under the water, and the animal would crawl into it, and it would sink, and it would drown. And they're known because they can they're called colony traps because you can catch multiple muskrat in them. I don't trap a whole lot of acreage, and I have a lot of traps, so I don't really have a need for one of those, although it would be nice to get eventually. So there you guys go. Pretty much all the muskrat traps they have. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. God bless, and see you on the next one.